All right, hello and welcome to this guide on understanding Maxroll loot filters. Now we already have a loot filter basics guide. However, Maxroll uses its own loot filter template, and we do that for a number of reasons, including consistency and ease of use, intuitiveness, and also making sure it's still powerful enough to be able to handle all the end game stuff it needs to do and still be valuable for new players. So this guide we're going to talk about how those work, so that if you are curious about something that it's doing, you don't not exactly sure what's happening there, or if you want to go in and actually make your own customizations to the guide, which it is designed to do easily, you can do so. So let's go ahead and get into how everything works here. If you're trying to follow along, please do download a filter. We have an example one in the guide, and we also explain how to load filters through the loot filter guide itself that we have. All right, let's start with the endgame build guide, and then we'll go to the leveling build guide filters second. So we're going to start from the bottom to the top, and I've actually got a character up here with an actual template, Maxroll template here, so we can explain it going from bottom to top. At bottom, as you would know, or you will know if you have listened to or read the loot filter basics guide, is the lowest priority stuff in the loot filter. The top is the highest priority, so anything that gets picked up at the top will not filter down to the bottom, so any hide rules below a show rule will not activate, for example. So what we're doing here with this first rule, hide all normal magic rare items, is we are hiding anything that gets through the filter that is not exalted, unique, set, and we're going to pick those up anyway with other filters, and telling the game that, look, they didn't make it through the filter, which means we don't want them, so hide those, please. And that's exactly what it's going to do. That's the first rule. It is the catch-all to make sure that we're not seeing stuff that we know we don't want. The second the second set of rules are for idols. So idols are obviously a very important part of the game. And so we have these two rules here, which will recolor idols that we know we are interested in for our build. We've decided not to hide any idols at all, because you never know when a really good idol for another build drops. Instead, the way that we're handling the filtering is saying, okay, if this is clearly something that you are interested in on this particular build, we will recolor it to this similar but not the same color. It's distinct enough to be identifiable, but not so far out that it makes no sense. So it makes sense that it's an idol color. And then if you happen to get an idol that has two of the affixes that we're looking for, two of the especially good ones, it will not only recolor it, it will emphasize it and make it larger, so that it's easier to see, easier to identify it on the ground. All right, next up, we have the recoloring or shadow removal. And these ones are for items that you would like to break down for parts to use in crafting. Oftentimes, this is going to be stuff like increased health, hybrid health, movement speed, cleanse, etc., or what's likely to go in here depending on the build maker. But generally, we all follow a pretty similar pattern. It might also be prefixes that are valuable for like your class, but maybe not super rare, might go in here. But the rarer ones, well, actually, there's one for rare. I should probably explain the difference here. We've got the first one, which is just useful stuff that's not super rare. And then the second one is for the rare stuff. So that one probably handle like prefixes for classes. We put those in there. And this is going to get picked up if those items don't show in your filter normally. So say if the filter just doesn't pick up that that's an item you want, maybe it's got the wrong implicit on it or doesn't fit some other rule, it'll pick up here and say, okay, this is probably not something you want to wear, but you might want to break it down so that you have the crafting materials later on the items that you do want to wear. All right, next up, we have show all exalted items. This one should be pretty obvious why we're going to do it. We don't want to miss out on exalted items because they're really, really good. And sometimes they're really good for other builds, or sometimes they're so good that you might want to wear them for this particular build, even if it's not ideal. However, we don't want all exalted items to just get hit by this particular rule without going through our show filter rules, so that they don't get colored properly for what we're looking for. So we put it below the other rules, but above, of course, the hide rules, to make sure that we still do see them if they get through the other stuff, but that we're filtering for a class first. Next up, we have our show rules. These are the rules for the actual build that do most of the work. They're doing the majority of the work to find the items that you want for your build. So we have show and show strict, and show is going to be and remember, this is not actually built up, so I have a bunch of stuff in here that I wouldn't actually want for, say, the build I'm playing right now. Let's go to something that's a little more generic. If you're actually looking at a build guide that, or a filter that's been made, a lot of these rules won't exist in here anymore because, for example, I don't want wands, so I would delete wands for a character that is running an axe. But if we're in belts, we're gonna have all the affixes that we want in here. We're gonna have all the subtypes that we want in here, and what the filter is going to do at that point is it's going to look for items that have at least 2 affixes on the same item of the ones you want. So if you have like 7 affixes in there, 2 of those affixes have to show up on the item, and then it will show for that item, or it will show that item in the filter. Now the strict ones are, as you would imagine, a lot more strict. They're going to do essentially the same thing. A build guide maker might decide that some affixes don't belong in the strict because they're not good enough. However, the majority of the stuff is going to be about the same as far as affixes and subtypes. But what's going to do is it's going to say, okay, we need at least 3 of these affixes on the item, and all of those affixes have to have at least tier 3 to show. Those are required, and we're not going to see any magic, but that's going to be true anyway because we have to have at least 3 affixes. So this is a much stricter one, but if it hits this one, it's going to be emphasized. Now, one of the great things about having it broke up in this regular and strict thing is if you get an item that's really good and you're like, there is no item that's not going to go through at least the strict part that I'm gonna want. All the stuff that doesn't reach the level of strict is just not good enough for me. You can now go in and just turn off the belt one. So we go here, we click this, or the regular one. You turn off the regular one, and you just leave the strict one on. And now you'll only see items that follow the strict parameters. So once you've got that item already in a really good state and you're looking for super high-end stuff, you don't have to see all the items that you know aren't going to be good to you anymore, and you can reduce some of the clutter on your screen. All right, next up is the show rules, show strict. Good. By the way, also we set these up so they're pretty easy to modify. So like you can go in here and you can change. You can want total affixes to be higher. You can do that. That's by design. We put all these rules in here to make sure that it's easy for you to go in and make adjustments if you want to. Maybe you only want it to be 2, but you want to make sure they all have 3 affixes. You can customize this as you wish. These are the rules that we decided we thought would be the best, but you know, for every player, their tastes are different, and we wanted to make sure that you could do it the way that you wanted to. So we've set it up in a way that hopefully will be logical for you to go in and make the changes you want to make. All right, next up, we have recolor high value affixes. So this one should be pretty self-explanatory. An affix is super high value, even more so than like the shattering, which is like, we want to see this no matter what. Maybe it's like the plus skill level for the build you're playing, and you might even want to wear that even if it's on not the best implicit for you and the best base early on, or you just want to really make sure you don't miss it so that you can shatter them if you need to. Whatever the reason might be, this is to make sure that those things are showing up anytime that you want them, and anytime that they end up dropping in the game, and that they're colored in a way that it's really hard to miss. They're gonna be bright red. The last rule we have on here is show all unique set items. That's just to make sure that you can see them all. If you have all the set items you want and you're tired of set items because they don't have a whole lot of extra benefit once you have a well-rolled one, you can go in here and just turn off the set part. You can just go in here and click off that, and then you just get the uniques. Highly recommend not to remove the unique though, because legendary potential means there's always a chance you can make something even better than it already is, and those are very high value exciting drops when they do occur. All right, that covers the endgame build guide filter. Let's transition over to the leveling filter. Let's see, here we go, leveling. These are going to follow a similar pattern. That's definitely by design. We want it to be intuitive for you to switch between leveling and endgame filters and have a sense of what's going on there if you're customizing as you go along. So the bottom rule, of course, is going to be a catch-all, just like the last one. It's going to do the same thing, have the same function as the endgame filter. It's going to catch everything that gets through all the other stuff and just get rid of it from the screen so that you don't have to see it. The next one is definitely different. It's show all first 2 levels for gold. You're like, well, that's an interesting one. Why is that in there? That's in there because the second map in the game has a vendor who oftentimes sells items that are quite high value for early game, And so we don't want stuff to be hidden and cause it to be the case you don't have enough gold for it. So the first 2 levels, you can see everything, and we recommend picking up everything in the first 2 levels, sell it to the vendor, and then buy the items that are really good in there if there are any. So this rule only applies to the first 2 levels, and it is set up so that it will turn off after level 2. By level 3, it's going to turn off, and then the regular filter rules will kick in. All right. Next up, we have idols. This is going to function identically to the endgame ones, where we're not hiding any idols from you, and we're recoloring the ones that are good, and we're recoloring and emphasizing the ones that have 2 really good affixes on them, so that you can identify the ones that might be especially valuable for you. Next is recoloring class affixes for storage, shatter, and removal. We've got this one in the leveling build because usually when you're leveling, you don't have a lot of the extra stuff you want maybe for other builds. That stuff can be really good to have, but even more so, it can be good to have for removing with chaos on affixes you don't want on there. So we have that in here to make sure that you can see those, and you can shatter or store them or remove them as you see fit, so that you can customize your gameplay through leveling a little bit more easily, and also start to build up a storage of items that you might want to use for another build. Next up is early campaign. We are breaking up this filter into early campaign, mid campaign, and early endgame. So how this works is each of these have level requirements. So this one goes to 30. All these early ones go to 30. Mid goes 30 to 54. By the way, these will be customized by the build maker. So some builds might want to go to level 28 because at that point there's a transition period where it's good to switch to the next filter. Some might go to 32. So this won't be the same for every filter, but it's going to probably be around that range for every filter. Same thing with the mid and the early end game. Those are by design meant to be customizable because not every build transitions at the same time. So in the early campaign, we have our show wanted fixes. These are of course the fixes that we actually want to see because they're going to be probably upgrades for our gear. And we do a hide useless bases early campaign as well, just in case there are some bases that are just really bad that you just don't have any interest in, or that are not going to be upgrades for your gear. Along with recolor high value fixes early game, that makes up the entirety of the early campaign part of the leveling filter. And of course, high value fixes early campaign is going to be stuff that is especially valuable to you when you're going along. Plus level to skills is going to be one example. Another example that you might find in here is health on melee hit. Very strong for especially high speed builds early game. Fixes like that, and it's going to be done by the build maker. In this case, it's almost certainly going to be Tarek. He's going to put in there, determine what is most valuable. But if you find that something is particularly valuable to you, you can always add it to that rule. Next up, we're going to go into mid-campaign. In this scenario, we're going to add a lot more rules, but not all of these rules will apply on your leveling guide, because what we're doing here is breaking up weapons into sections so that we can hide bases that are not useful. So the build maker will go in here and say, okay, this is a two-handed axe build, so we'll just remove all the non-two-handed axes or whatever it might be that is good for that particular build. So you'll see a lot fewer than these in your actual loot filter. That's what the hide unused stuff or unwanted stuff does there. It's like, all right, this is an axe build, but these axes aren't good enough for mid-campaign. We're going to hide them. Hide unused weapons mid-campaign will just hide anything that is not going to be used. So if you're an axe build, all the other weapons are going to end up in here so that we're not seeing them. And then show wanted to fixes mid-campaign is doing something very similar to what show wanted to fixes early campaign is. The only difference is we need to have at least tier 2 on these items, where we need to have tier 1 on the early campaigns. You can adjust these as you want to, although when you're leveling, you might not want to get too crazy on that one because you don't have as many items dropping. There's also recolor high value fixes for mid-campaign. Works the same as for early campaign, just for this level range. The last section, outside of the major or the show walls of uniques and exalted and whatnot, is early endgame. And what this is meant for is it's designed to transition you into an endgame build, because leveling builds are not meant to be played deep into the endgame. So this is going to work very similar to the show rules in the endgame filter. The only difference is you won't have a strict version because you won't need one, because you are transitioning out before you get to that point. So as we pull these up, we can see it's also 2 of these affixes on the same item, similar or it's the same as the endgame build. So it's going to work the same way. You put the build makers and put their subtypes in and the affixes that they want, and it's going to look for at least 2 of those affixes, and whatever matches that is going to show. The other things are not going to. That is how the early endgame works. Those are fairly simple. The other rules, there is a recolor high value affixes early endgame one, which is works the same way as the mid and the early campaign. And then there's a hide non-class items. This is so that you're not getting hit up with items that you definitely aren't going to need for your build. You can turn that off if you like to find stuff for, that's not for your class, but for most players, that's not going to be relevant loot for them. And then the last 2 are show all unique set items and show all exalted items. Exalted don't show very often at all. If you're running a leveling build, if you're getting to the point where you're seeing a lot of exalteds, you've probably gone too far. But if you're in the early end game, right before you transition your build, you'll definitely start to see some exalted. So this makes sure that you see all of the exalteds that could drop on the ground. All right, that should be everything that we need to cover. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Yep, that's it. All right, hopefully that helps assist you in working with Maxroll loot filters. If you have any questions about them, feel free to ask. I am streaming most of the time, or well, maybe not most of the time, but a lot of the time, and I'm happy to answer questions also in YouTube or on my Discord to assist you in anything that you might need, all things Maxroll and Last Epoch related. But especially if you're having any issues with the loot filters, please do let me know. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you have a great time in Last Epoch, and I'll see you all again real soon.